Hello again, and welcome back to another edition of the Wiccan Conservative. Today, I wanted to talk about something that hasn't been talked about in a really long time, and we should probably just let it go, but I can't, so we're going to talk about it today. This is an article all the way back from February 16th. Do you guys remember that little incident known as the George Floyd death? Yeah, this is about that. So, as you can see on your screen, I have an article from ABC News, and it is titled The Key Takeaways from the Former Cop's Testimony in Federal Trial Over George Floyd's Death. And basically, what this is a highlight of the then ongoing trial of two Tao and Tao's co-defendants, J. Alexander Kung and Thomas Lane. These were the other three officers that were on the scene with Derek Chauvin at the time of George Floyd's death. It's really a good idea to go back and read about these co-defendants for anybody who is not familiar with their roles in the death of George Floyd. Now, reading this particular article, it states that everybody is stated to testify in the trial that's taking place in St. Paul, Minnesota. Tao was among the first witnesses called by the defense a day after the prosecutors rested their case. He testified about his experience of wanting to become a police officer and also testified that he was trained to use knees to restrain suspects. Now, if anybody remembers properly, that was the biggest glaring issue in the George Floyd case. Was the knee restraint, was it something that was trained from the department? Was it something that was in the handbook? Was this something that was done out of malice? And of course, in the court of public opinion, it was stated that this was done in malice. And after that was stated, it just kind of ran rampant, not only through the court of public opinion, but it also made its way into the actual court cases. Now, this is something that I've been personally interested in for the simple fact that it seems as though they're going to get what they desire in police reform from this incident in many different ways. Not only have they shaped the legislators' budget process for these departments in many different states and areas, but based upon what I've seen, and I've just glossed over a couple finer points of these two cases, is that they are going to get the change in the police departments as well. Well, I'm going to tell you what I'm talking about. So, as you can see on your screen, part of the back and forth through the trial was between the prosecutor and Tao. The prosecutor asked, just to be clear, is this something that was typically taught at the academy when you were there, referring to the knee work that was done by Derek Chauvin? Paul asked if he, as he showed the jury several photos of police cadets in training sessions with their knees on the backs and necks of actors pretending to be suspects. Tao replied, yes. Paul then asked, were you ever told it's improper? And Tao said no. Several training supervisors from the Minneapolis Police Department testified for the prosecution that all three defendants appeared to ignore their training as the handcuffed Floyd was being held to the ground and became unconscious. So, just to be clear, there were photos of cadets in training in similar restraints, and the officers were trained to do this procedure. We said this in the beginning, but now that the overall emotional state of the argument is done. I think it's something that needs to again be reiterated, that this was part of their training and it was something to use to immobilize suspects. And unfortunately, we had a very tragic end to this immobilization process. Tal testified that he and Chauvin were partnered up on the day of the Floyd incident. He said they were eating lunch at their precinct when the call came in about Floyd's arrest outside the store. He said that he and Chauvin were responding to a backup to Lane and Keg. Dispatch called them off, but Tal said that he and Chauvin continued to drive to Cup Foods. So I believe that this is supposed to bleed into the racial undertones, that they were called off of this call and that they were continuing to pursue something that they were called off of. Tal said that he and Chauvin were initially just going to act as security in case things got out of hand. But when they arrived, they found Lane and Kang, struggling to get a combative Floyd into the back of their squad car. If you continue on through the article, you will see that Tal states he had no idea the seriousness of Floyd's condition, completely contradicting the testimony that these officers should have been aware that he was in serious medical conflict. He was asked, did you have any idea the seriousness of the medical condition? And Tal said that he had no idea. He just kind of connected the dots after they had left. This sounds like somebody who, again, analyzed the situation for what it was caught up in the moment, and then kind of looked back and was like, ooh, maybe I should pretend to feign some concern. You may disagree with me on that until you get to the actual end of this case. So they both face additional charge alleging they knew Chauvin was kneeling on Floyd's neck but did nothing to stop him. So I went to see what the final disposition of this case was, and this is what led me to that prior conclusion. And that was after Lane decided to testify that he was concerned with Floyd's condition and that he was rebuffed by Chauvin for feigning concern for George Floyd. He was the only officer that was not charged with basically ignoring the distress of a citizen. In closing arguments, a defense attorney for Tal said Floyd's death was a tragedy, but just because something has a tragic ending does not mean it's a crime. Kang's attorney, Thomas Plunkett, said his client was confident in Chauvin and had received training from the police department that was inadequate to help him see, perceive, and understand what was happening here. But Lane was the only one who was not charged with failing to intervene. And he said that he was concerned and suggested turning Floyd on his side, but was ignored by Chauvin. So, all in all, because Lane did this, and then he did chest compressions on Floyd when the paramedics arrived, prepared to load him into an ambulance, he was still found guilty, but he was not found guilty of the extra charge because he feigned this concern for George Floyd. So the glaring thing that really jumped out to me as I read through both of these articles was the fact that we're now gonna look at the officer's training because of one particular incident and the way that a collaborative of men handled that incident. And we're going to change the way that we do things outside of maybe practicality or safety or something that's a little bit more substantive than one isolated incident where we know there was a lot of extenuating circumstance to what happened in that incident. And it's kind of the way that a lot of unhappy people are going about changing laws and community values and ethics improperly in society. They are taking their grievances to the street, and instead of accessing proper channels and bouncing ideas off of a majority of people, they're staying in echo chambers and they're feeding off of each other's energy and building into a force that is outside of productivity. And what I mean by that is you cannot have a conversation with these people and get them to rationalize their feelings and work it into a policy that everybody can live by. And they want change so immediately that they're not willing to wait through due process. So they are finding what most people would call loopholes or roundabout ways to get what they want through their behaviors and through their actions. So at the end of the day, a jury convicted Chauvin on state murder and manslaughter charges in December. And eventually, what came down the rumor mill is I hear he ran out of funding for fighting the charges. So he pled guilty to violating Floyd's civil rights and is awaiting sentencing in that federal case. He remains in prison on a 22.5-year sentence for the state case, and that is one of the longest imposed on a police officer for a killing in the line of duty. And ultimately, that was their goal. They wanted to make that charge stick, and they did find all three officers guilty that worked in conjunction with Chauvin on this police call. So, unfortunately, this is what we have to combat in our society. We have to reel in our emotions and we have to educate the people on how to properly use the channels available to them in order to keep this republic alive, in my personal opinion. But that's all I have for you guys today, and I will catch you on the next one.